woman they tried to humiliate was about to change the entire airline industry. What will happen when those in power realize the very person they wronged owns everything they stand on? Let us know in the comments section below. Excuse me, ma'am. Janet Glover didn't flinch. She had heard that tone before. She was used to it. The kind that wasn't quite a question, but more like a challenge wrapped in customer service. Her eyes lifted slowly from the worn leather satchel she was zipping shut. The gate agent, a young woman with a tightly clipped ponytail and a tension in her voice that didn't match her age, was already leaning too far into her space. Janet had seen her before. Too young to be tired, yet already carrying the weight of imagined authority like it was stitched into her blazer. Yes? Janet's voice was calm, even, controlled. The voice of someone who owned many things, but never needed to announce it. The gate agent scanned her from head to toe, barely concealing the quick flicker of judgment in her eyes. Slacks, plain blouse, sensible sneakers. No designer logos. No assistant trailing behind her. Just making sure you're in the right boarding group, the woman said, nodding toward the pre-boarding lane Janet was standing in. This line is for first class only. I know, Janet replied, slipping a boarding pass from the leather sleeve. She held it up, not with pride but with purpose. The barcode was clean. Her name was printed in bold. Janet Glover, Sky Priority 1A. The agent's smile strained. Right, of course. Sorry, just checking. Janet gave a slight nod. She didn't need to say anything else. The kind of people who needed her to explain herself didn't deserve the explanation. Behind her, she could already feel eyes. One pair especially. Belonged to a woman with a pearl bracelet and a stare that didn't know when to look away. Janet didn't look back. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, her fingers grazed her phone. No texts from Michelle yet, which was rare. Her assistant usually sent a quick message by now, something like, "Wheels up, let me know when you land, rest, you've earned it." But today had been long. The board meeting in Denver ran 2 hours late. A partner pulled out of the Europe expansion plan, and Janet, for all her composure, had started to feel the exhaustion weigh into her bones. As she entered the aircraft, the flight attendant greeted her with a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard, first class is to your right." Janet nodded, taking the short turn and finding her seat already prepped. Cool towel, bottled water, and the neatly folded blanket. 1A. Window seat. Her favorite. She placed her bag under the seat and settled in. Headphones out, tablet tucked beside her. Just as she reached for the water bottle, someone cleared their throat beside her. Janet turned. It was the woman from the terminal, the one with the pearl bracelet, blonde, mid-50s, pink cardigan over a pastel dress. She was standing directly in the aisle, lips pressed into a tight line. "Excuse me," the woman said with too much volume, "I think you're in my seat." Janet blinked, looked at her boarding pass, then at the seat. "This is 1A, Janet said softly. "I believe that's mine." The woman huffed and waved over the nearest flight attendant. "Can we sort this out?" the woman said, exasperated. "This young lady has made a mistake. I've flown this route a dozen times. I always sit in 1A. The flight attendant, Tina, stepped closer, tablet in hand. She checked the manifest, cross-referenced, then smiled, tight and polite. "Mrs. Glover is in the correct seat, ma'am," Tina said. "You're in 1C. The woman looked wounded, as though she'd been robbed of a birthright. "Oh," she muttered. "Well, I guess they changed it." She trudged away, dragging her tote behind her. Janet turned back toward the window. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her, expressionless. She thought of her mother in Georgia, how she used to say, "You don't have to raise your voice to raise the bar." The murmurs started small, a whisper here, a glance there. As the rest of the passengers boarded, Janet could feel the cabin tilt, not from turbulence, but tension, the kind you recognize in silence. Tina stopped by again. Would you like anything before takeoff? Janet shook her head. I'm fine. The door closed, the plane pushed back. 30 minutes in, cruising over Kansas, Janet kept to herself. She sipped her water, read through a digital draft of her next initiative for corporate training. Ironically, it was focused on implicit bias workshops. She didn't even flinch when the captain came over the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Holtzway. We'll be flying smooth tonight with just a few clouds ahead. His voice was confident, commanding, like he owned the air. Janet knew who he was. She'd approved his hire 2 years ago. But he didn't know her. Not yet. And judging by the fact that he'd just walked past her without a glance, he was about to learn in the most unexpected way. The seatbelt sign blinked off with a soft chime, and the moment it did, 2 things happened. First, the man across the aisle, business suit, salt and pepper hair, the kind who wore his tie too tight and his smile too loose, took out his phone and tried to discreetly take a photo of Janet. Not directly, no, just enough of an angle to make it seem like he was snapping a landscape shot out the window. Janet noticed, of course. She had developed eyes in the back of her head long before she ever stepped into a boardroom. Second, the blonde woman from earlier leaned forward in her seat, whispering to the man next to her. The two exchanged a glance. Then another glance in Janet's direction. Janet exhaled quietly through her nose and pulled the silk scarf from her bag. It was a habit, folding it over her lap like a napkin, even when there was no meal being served. Her mother used to say it was a shield, a lady's armor. She wondered now if it was also a flag, something that signaled refinement to the kind of people who needed symbols just to believe someone belonged. From the galley, Tina approached again. Her smile was tight, but something in her eyes seemed hesitant now, as though the earlier seating mix-up had left a question mark in her mind. Mrs. Glover, would you like the meal service, chicken or vegetarian pasta? Janet didn't feel hungry, but she didn't want to give anyone more ammunition either. The whispers were already building, and she could feel them curling like smoke around her row. Pasta, please. Tina nodded, then turned back to the galley. She moved quickly, too quickly, and nearly bumped into Captain Derek Holtz, who had just emerged from the cockpit. He was stretching his legs, not uncommon, the flight was long, but he didn't even glance at the woman seated in 1A. Instead, he leaned down into the open seat at one seat, the blonde woman's aisle, and asked with the kind of easy confidence that came from years of being unchallenged, "Everything all right over here?" The woman lowered her voice, but not enough. "It's fine," she said, "just surprised by the seating today." Holtz chuckled as if they were sharing some inside joke. "We've been getting all kinds of odd bookings lately, people ending up in the wrong cabins. It's the algorithm, I swear." The woman sighed dramatically. "I just like to feel safe, comfortable. These days you never know what kind of person you're flying with." Janet didn't move. Didn't blink. She kept her eyes on the window, where the clouds outside looked soft and harmless, unlike the quiet venom in the row beside her. The captain didn't say anything. He just stood up, nodded at the woman like they'd reached an understanding, and walked down the aisle. But as he passed Janet, he did a double take, not because he recognized her, but because he finally seemed to see her. Not the seat, not the scarf, but her. He paused, then backtracked a single step. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his tone neutral, but alert now. "You comfortable up here?" She looked at him. "And fine." He tilted his head, like he didn't quite believe her. "Just checking. It's rare to see someone flying alone up here without a companion." Janet let that hang for a moment. Then, with deliberate slowness, she folded her hands on her lap and looked him in the eye. "Is that so?" The question caught him off guard. He blinked. "I meant no offense, just noticing things." "Huh? I see." He waited for her to say more. She didn't, and eventually he gave a tight nod and turned away. Janet watched him go, then reached down and pulled out her tablet again. She opened a new note. Subject line: Incident report. Flight 223, Blue Jet Airways. She began to type. She listed names she already knew: Captain Derek Holtz, Tina Alvarez, a few of the IDs from the manifest, quietly pulled from her secure files during boarding. She wrote with precision, not emotion. Halfway through, her phone buzzed. Michelle, we've got an HR issue on the Oakland route. Call when you land. Also, Boardroom approved the training initiative. Let's announce it next week. Janet stared at the message for a moment, then typed back. Actually, we may need to announce it sooner. Tina returned with her tray. As she set it down, she hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the screen, where the subject line still glowed at the top. She must have caught the word incident. Everything all right, ma'am? Janet tilted her head, then closed the screen with one finger. Fine, thank you. Tina didn't move. There was something unsure in her posture, a wobble in her professional stillness. If anyone said anything, uncomfortable, Tina said, her voice softer now. You can let us know. Janet looked at her. Can I? Tina's mouth parted, unsure how to answer, and that silence was louder than anything else Janet had heard on that flight. Enjoy your pasta, Tina added quickly, then walked away. The smell of reheated marinara filled the air. Janet didn't touch the tray. From the back of the cabin, a baby cried. Someone coughed. The man across the aisle took another photo, this time less discreet. Janet turned slowly. Her voice was low, calm, and clear. Delete it. The man froze, caught mid-swipe. I beg your pardon? You heard me? He looked around as if for backup. No one intervened. No one ever did. You're in a public space, he said, trying to defend his action. You're in my space, Janet replied. The man frowned, then reluctantly lowered his phone. She waited until she saw the screen go black. No apology. None expected. Janet turned back to the window. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Tina watching from the galley curtain. Just watching, not stepping in, not stepping up. Janet's phone buzzed again. Michelle, everything okay? She stared at the message. They then typed back. Not yet, but it will be. Because somewhere above the clouds, between silence and stares, between tension and civility, Janet had already decided. The next time she flew commercial, no one would forget who she was, and no one would be able to pretend they didn't know. Captain Derek Holtz returned to the cockpit, closing the door behind him with a little more force than necessary. He sat in his seat, silent for a moment, jaw tight. His co-pilot, a younger man named Ryan with too much caffeine and not enough caution, looked over. You all right? Ryan asked, adjusting the altitude dials without looking up. Yeah, Holtz muttered. Just passenger in first. Not on the manifest. I think they overrode the seating again. Algorithms messing things up. Ryan shrugged. It happens. No, Holtz said, sharper than he meant to. She's odd. Like she doesn't belong there. Sitting like she owns the place. Ryan chuckled. Well, it is first class. Holtz didn't laugh. His fingers drummed against the throttle controls, mind stuck on the way Janet had looked at him. Calm, direct, not intimidated. That's what had unsettled him. He couldn't place it, but it nagged at him, like he was the one being observed, not the other way around. Meanwhile, Janet sat motionless, watching the minutes tick by on her tablet, every second stretching like a thread. She had pulled out a notepad now, old-school, real paper, the kind with ridges on the side and the scent of ink that always brought her back to her earliest days in aviation, back when she worked from a tiny cubicle with second-hand phones and a window view of a brick wall. She wrote slowly, a list of dates, employee names, flight routes, codes only she understood, not because she was paranoid, but because in her world details mattered, and right now everything needed to be documented, every word, every look, every silence. Across the aisle, the blonde woman was back to whispering, this time to a man who had come up from coach to use the first-class lavatory. She leaned in, eyes wide, voice low. "I just feel like they let anyone up here now." The man didn't respond, but he nodded, and that was enough to feed her sense of righteousness. Janet heard it, every syllable, but she didn't flinch. She reached into her bag and pulled out her ID badge, not to flash it around, but to remind herself who she was, because sometimes even the strongest woman needs to feel the weight of her title in her hand. Founder and CEO, Blue Jet Airways. It was simple, sleek, heavy. She held it for a moment. Then she placed it gently on the tray table, right there, next to the untouched pasta. Tina walked by again, slower this time. Her eyes caught the badge. She stopped mid-step. "Oh," she said, soft, breathless. Janet raised her eyes, not smug, not gloating, just steady. "I wasn't sure it was really you," Tina said, voice cracking just a little. Janet didn't respond. Tina leaned closer, dropping her volume. I'm sorry. I didn't know when you boarded. They didn't brief us. So you don't need a briefing to treat people with decency." The words weren't cruel. They weren't sharp, but they cut anyway. Tina stepped back, looking like she'd been slapped. Then she nodded, her mouth drawn tight, and disappeared behind the galley curtain. The man across the aisle was watching again. "So you do work for the airline," he said, like a revelation. Janet looked at him. "I am the airline." That shut him up. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just been cleared for a smooth descent into Atlanta. We'll begin our descent in about 20 minutes. Atlanta. Oh, well, technically. Corporate headquarters sat just outside the city, a glass-paneled tower that reflected every inch of blue sky it touched. Her office was on the top floor, but she hadn't been there in weeks. Meetings had kept her grounded. Ironically, flying had become her only quiet place. But today, even the sky wasn't silent. The curtain parted again. Tina returned, this time with a man in a gray vest and headset. The in-flight supervisor. "Miss Glover," he said, polite, hands folded like he was about to ask for forgiveness. "May I speak with you privately?" Janet stood. The cabin was watching now, everyone. Even the pilots could probably feel the shift. She followed him to the galley. Tina stayed a step behind. "I just wanted to apologize," the supervisor began. "For the experience you've had on board today, it's unacceptable. The staff, they didn't know, but that's no excuse." Janet listened, didn't interrupt. "I've already contacted our operations center," he continued, "and we'll be documenting this flight thoroughly. If there's anything you'd like to share now, She held up a hand. "I'll be contacting your office directly." He blinked, then nodded. Understood. She stepped past him and walked back to her seat. As she sat, the man across the aisle looked ready to speak again, but one look from Janet and he turned away. Tina appeared again, almost instantly. "Miss Glover, I've moved the other passengers in this row. You'll have it to yourself now." Janet didn't smile. "That won't be necessary." Tina hesitated. "I just thought it might be more comfortable." "Comfort doesn't come from empty space," Janet said, her voice low. "It comes from accountability." Tina nodded, shame written all over her features, and walked away. 15 minutes later, the wheels touched down on the Atlanta runway. The plane rolled to the gate, the cabin lights brightened, seatbelts clicked open, the usual bustle began. But the silence around Janet remained thick, like fog that hadn't lifted. The door opened. A uniformed agent from corporate stepped on board. He wasn't supposed to be there, but he had been sent the moment Janet texted Michelle. He approached her seat, leaned down and whispered, "The boardroom's waiting. HR's been briefed. We've grounded the captain pending review." Janet stood, collected her things, and walked slowly to the exit. Passengers parted for her like a tide. She stepped off the plane, not as a passenger anymore, not as someone misunderstood, but as the one person in the building who could rewrite every single policy that let this happen. And she would. Every single one. The doors to the boardroom swung open before Janet even reached them. Michelle stood just inside, already holding a digital pad and a legal notepad, because she always knew which kind of day it was. "They're all here," Michelle said, voice low, following Janet's pace. "I assumed they would be." Janet didn't break stride as she walked through the threshold. The room was filled, every executive from the C-suite, 2 HR directors, a corporate attorney, and a few regional heads who had flown in hours earlier when they'd gotten wind that she was coming. No one said a word at first. Just the low hum of shifting in seats, clearing throats, the occasional scratch of a pen across paper. The large Blue Jet logo hovered on the wall behind Janet's seat, the one at the head of the table. She took it without hesitation. "Before we begin," Janet said, her voice even, "you've all reviewed the preliminary report?" They nodded, quietly, some too eager, others avoiding eye contact. Michelle moved beside her, tapping the screen to bring up the summary on the central monitor. Images appeared. Security footage from the terminal, cabin logs, an audio clip, muted but damning, of Captain Holtz speaking with the passenger in 1C. "Ms. Glover," one of the HR directors began, tentatively, "we want to extend our sincere—" Janet raised a hand. "I'm not here for apologies." She let that hang. "I'm here to restructure." A murmur moved around the room. Not panic, just the ripple of people who realized they were no longer observing a moment, but standing in the middle of one. "Let me be very clear," Janet continued. "What happened on that flight is not isolated. It's not new. And it's not accidental. It is a reflection of a system we built." No one responded. They didn't need to. "When I started Blue Jet," she said, "I did it with a single promise. To fly above expectations, not just in service, but in culture, in opportunity, in representation. Somewhere along the way we got comfortable. We stopped looking inward, and now we're paying the price." Michelle clicked again. Another screen. This time it was the internal diversity report, buried for years beneath marketing data and fleet expansion charts. It was stark. Leadership roles, 87% white. Training department, 92% without formal bias education. Customer complaints regarding discrimination, trending upward over the past 5 quarters. "We fix this now," Janet said, "or we fail in ways that no rebrand or PR spin will ever undo." She tapped the screen herself. A new program appeared. Bold letters across the header. Elevate. A blueprint for equity in aviation. "Starting this quarter, we launch Elevate," she said. "A pipeline program to recruit, train, and promote underrepresented talent across every department, from ground staff to flight crew to executive leadership." Eyes widened around the room. Janet went on. "Every employee, regardless of role, will undergo updated anti-bias and de-escalation training. Certified, not checkbox modules, ongoing, not one and done, led by educators and advocates, not by HR generalists with a slide deck." One of the younger regional directors finally spoke. "Is this retroactive for senior staff as well?" "Especially for senior staff," Janet said, locking eyes with him. "Anyone unwilling to meet the standard is welcome to leave before they're asked to." Another screen. Faces this time. Future candidates. Partnership logos from HBCUs, veterans organizations, disability advocates, LGBTQ+ networks. "We don't wait for diverse talent to find us," she said. "We find them. We invest in them, and we make damn sure our gates open wider than ever before." Silence. Then someone clapped. Michelle? Then 2 more. Soon the room followed. Not performative, not polite, but a ripple of people who understood, at least in that moment, that something monumental had begun. After the meeting, as the room cleared, Michelle lingered. "You want me to prep the press team?" Janet nodded. "Full announcement, this week." "And the captain?" "Suspended. Review pending. But he won't fly for us again. That much I'm certain." Michelle hesitated. As media outside, terminal cameras picked up the confrontation. Someone leaked the video. It's gone viral. Janet didn't look surprised. She stepped toward the window instead, gazing out over the tarmac. "Let them watch." She took a deep breath. "Actually," she said, turning back, "I want to speak publicly. No press release, no ghost-written apology. I'll do it live." Michelle blinked. "You sure?" Janet smiled, not because she was confident, but because she was ready. "Oh, wait." Later that afternoon, in a studio corner of the Blue Jet headquarters, a podium was set up. A few rows of seats, cameras, reporters buzzing, microphones labeled with network names and hashtags already trending. Janet stood behind the podium. She looked into the camera like she was speaking to one person and the entire world at once. "I'm Janet Glover, founder and CEO of Blue Jet Airways. No scripted openers, no spin. Yesterday I boarded one of our flights, as I always do, quietly, without title, without announcement, and I was met with suspicion, hostility, and silence, not from strangers on the street, but from people representing the brand I built." She paused. "This isn't a story about humiliation or revenge. It's about reality." Flashbulbs popped. "But this is also a story about change, about accountability, about reclaiming what we should have always protected: dignity, equity, and respect, in every seat, at every gate, for every passenger and professional who walks through our doors." She leaned slightly forward. "And to those who think a uniform gives them permission to judge, to target, to belittle, let me make this very clear. That seat you thought I didn't belong in?" She smiled now. "I own the plane." The room went still. No movement, no clicks, just air, holding still in collective recognition. After the cameras stopped and the crowd dispersed, Janet stepped out into the lobby. An older woman waited there, hair silver, eyes soft, leaning on a cane. A retired gate agent who used to work with Janet back in her first days on the tarmac. "You did good," the woman said. Janet took her hand, gently. "We're just getting started." The sun had dipped lower now, casting long golden beams through the wide glass lobby, and for the first time in days Janet exhaled. Not in exhaustion, but in peace. Outside, a group of young cadets stood in their crisp uniforms, part of the first cohort of Elevate trainees. They didn't know she was watching. They were laughing, wide-eyed, hopeful, the kind of hope Janet remembered feeling once, the kind she was determined to make last. And for the first time in a long time, the sky didn't feel like a limit. It felt like home.